when I was a little kid, I started scribbling prayers to God on little scraps of paper and throwing them away. I didn't know what to do with it. And had a roommate in college who ended up becoming the president of a Christian publishing company. And I'd got my Master's of Divinity at Fuller Seminary, and every pastor in America wants to be a writer, and so he asked me if I would be a ghostwriter on a book for a Christian television personality, and I said sure, and the book became a top 10 bestseller, and this was 1997. It just took me a totally different direction than I ever thought I would go. But how much English experience do I have other than speaking the language for 53 and a half years? Is I took freshman English in college, and that's it. And I wanted to just encourage you, if you say I can't do it, it's music and English. I mean, music and writing are very similar. If you can do it, you get work. So anyway, if you don't have the education, it doesn't matter. So since 1987, I've ghostwritten 20 books. I've authored 4 books for traditional publishers. I've worked on over 70 traditionally published books in various capacities. My roommate from college actually ended up starting his own publishing company called Zulon Press, which some of you have probably heard of. It's the largest Christian self-publishing company. He sold that. Then we went into business together and formed a company called the Michael Thomas Group. We were publishing books. Then he's gone off and he's doing his own thing, and now I have Illumify Media Global. So we're a publishing company. I have books back there. Come visit me, just say hi, and you can see books that we've done. But if you're, how many of you are new to this whole writing, publishing thing? And so this can be overwhelming. Where do I start? There can be a lot of fear, like I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know if I'm going the wrong direction or if somebody's telling me wrong. And so I offered to do a workshop for Chris, and talking about self-publishing or indie publishing versus traditional publishing. And I walk on both sides of this. I'm a theological editor for David C. Cook on most of their Sunday school curriculum. So it's not that I'm just doing indie publishing. But I wanted to talk about both those real quick. Advantages of traditional publishing. When I talk about traditional publishing, that means that you sign a contract and they pay for everything. And that's fun. So one of the advantages of going with a traditional publisher is the critical acclaim. There's something about having somebody outside saying, you know what, you have a good idea, and we're gonna publish that book, and we're gonna invest money, because a traditional publishing company may invest $100,000, $200,000 into your book. So it feels good. Also, if you're a professional and you want to make, if you're trying to establish your career, it's great validation for your ideas. Another advantage is there's no money out of pocket. They're paying for everything. Another advantage is the books that they produce are high quality, that they look really good. You get a professional book cover designer, you get a professional, writing your back cover copy, which is the back side of your book, talking about your book. You get a professional copy editor. So the book comes out and it just looks and feels really good. You also have good distribution into bookstores. And they work on that. And these are parts of publishing. Most, I came from the editorial end. I don't even think about it. But publishing companies publish books, and then there are book distribution companies that distribute the books. And so you can get your books into the bookstores. The marketing, we'll talk about that. They will do some marketing. I wrote a book called Prayers to Move Your Mountains for Thomas Nelson in 2000. And they did a little bit of marketing, but not a lot. They had about 100 books to choose from, and probably really marketed about 10 of their books that year. You also, when you go with a traditional publisher, there's hope. You have hope that you could be the next Philip Yancey or the next Paul Young if you catch lightning in a bottle. I have a friend. What did I say? So I have a friend, and her name is Lisa Hawker. She spent 25 years honing her craft, learning how to write, and she signed a contract at age 50 with HarperCollins writing thriller fiction. And but she caught lightning in a bottle, and she's selling a lot of books. But also, when everything works, you can make a good living, and you can also impact a lot of lives. And I came into writing as a pastor. I just want to make a difference. I want to make a difference for the kingdom, so you can impact a lot of lives. Now, just as there are upsides to traditional publishing, there are downsides to traditional publishing. One of which, the barriers to be accepted are extremely high. I mean, it's not like anybody can just choose they're going to be traditionally published. Because you've got to have, there's just so many variables that go into it. You know, it could be, you could have a great idea, but the market just isn't buying the book, that type of a genre at the moment. Or maybe the writing quality isn't high enough. Or maybe, you know, you have to have a unique idea, and if you're just saying what other people are saying, the traditional publisher won't want to pick you up. Or maybe they just released a book 18 months ago that's similar to what your book is, and so they don't want to pick you up. Or the biggest barrier is your platform. And if you're new to writing, a platform is that pool of people who find you credible and will buy your book. And the longer that you hang out in writing circles, the more you're going to hear about that word platform. It's kind of a bad word, you know, because it's really hard. You got to build up this, I don't want to say a fan base, but that's basically what it is. So I was coaching an author. I live in Littleton, and he had a great idea for a book. It's kind of a John Eldridge for millennials. His writing was fresh, it was funny, he did some of his own artwork, it was pretty good, and I loved his idea. And so I coached him on his book proposal, and then took his information to an agent. And the agent, the first question he asked was, well, tell me about his platform. And I said, well, he pastors a church of 1,000 people, and it wasn't good enough. Couldn't get picked up. So the barriers are pretty high. And the frustrating part is sometimes you can have people who don't have anything to say, but they can get published because they're famous. Yeah. Or you can have somebody who has something to say, but they don't have that platform, and so they can't get picked up by a publisher. So, you know, one of my concerns is all too often in traditional publishing, the message and the quality of writing are subservient to the platform. And you know, so like I said, there's good points and there's bad points. So also, another downside of traditional publishing is your publisher might not understand your book. You have a person designing your book cover, it's not what you're envisioning. Or they're working with you on your title, and it's not, they push you to go with a certain title, and that's not really what you're thinking of. Or the back cover copy, the person writes it, but they've never read your book. And you read it, you go, no, that's not what my book is about. So also, people go into traditional publishing because they want to get an advance. An advance is money that you get up front, and then your royalties pay it off. An advance is, my first book I signed a contract with, I got a $20,000 advance. And then 8 years ago, I got about a $10,000 advance. And now, advances are very little. So it's not like you're going to be making a lot of money on the front end of a book. Also, your royalties are fairly low. My book, Strange Fire, Holy Fire, I wrote for Bethany House, I get about $1.50 a book that sells. And it's just the way it is. Another issue is the loss of creative control. So I was working on one book, I'm writing about my wife, and I made a reference to my hot wife. And the publisher called me and they said, well, we can't carry that. That's just has too many sexual connotations. I said, I'm talking about my wife. And they said, no, we're not going to put it in the book. And it wasn't a hill I was going to die on, but you do lose creative control. And for understandable reasons, the traditional publishing company is investing a lot of money into your book, and they're not going to let somebody just run off with it. I'm publishing a book for a person that's going to be the traditional route, and we're putting in a lot of money, my partner and I. And so there's certain things she may want in the book, but we don't think it's going to sell, and so we're not going to let her do it. And that's just the reality because you have people investing in the book. In traditional publishing, everything moves very slow. From start to finish, it could be 9 to 24 months. When I wrote Strange Fire, Holy Fire, it was about 18 months from the time I signed the contract until the book was released. So you got to be patient. If you want to turn around a book pretty quick, you're going to have to go a different route. And also, your book can get lost. So I have a friend, she's a best-selling Christian author in Colorado Springs. Her publishing company released the book. At the same time, the company was being bought by somebody else, and it just slipped through the cracks and really derailed her authoring career because she was trying to build momentum, and they lost the book. And then people don't want to sign her because that one book didn't sell well. Well, there's a reason why it didn't sell. But I think the biggest concern I have about traditional publishing is that you lose the rights to your book. So the way the copyright law works is that when a traditional publishing company picks up your book, they keep those copyrights until 70 years after you die. So the chances of you ever seeing those copyrights coming back are pretty small. You can go back to your publishing company and ask for the rights back, but what's happened is books are now, companies can carry books, they can print books, it's called print on demand, where just when people purchase the book, it'll spit out the book, a printer will. So they don't have any interest in giving you your book back. So I wrote Prayers to Move Your Mountains in 2000 for Thomas Nelson, and there's an agent in Hollywood that's handing out that book to people in the entertainment community. And she told me a year or two ago, she says, Mike, she goes, you need to get those rights back because you could be publishing that book and you could maximize your income. And I emailed, tried to contact Thomas Nelson, and they wouldn't even return my calls. So I won't get the rights back. And I love that book. And anyway, so that's the downside. So like there are really good sides to traditional publishing. There's a downside. And then there's indie publishing. And indie publishing, the upside of indie publishing is that it's growing. And since 2011, indie published titles have increased 218%. That's according to Bowker. Now, Bowker is the company that issues ISBN numbers. It's like the address of your book, the identification number of your book. And it's grown. It's still going crazy. Traditional publishing is stagnant. So anyway, so it's just going crazy. In self-publishing or indie publishing, you have total creative control. You can say anything you want. And you can say whatever you want, however you want to say it. You have the final word on the book cover design, on the back cover copy, on the manuscript approvals, everything. And you can write a book to a niche of 50 people if that's what you want. Or if you want to be a legacy author, in other words, you want to write a book to leave to your kids where it's not going to sell a lot of books, and that is a great reason to write a book. It's a noble reason, but you can do that and you don't have to have anybody's approval to do it. So there's a lot of freedom. There's empowerment that comes from taking a book from start to finish, finishing up this manuscript, figuring out the book cover. It's very empowering. You can turn around your book a lot faster. So like in our company, if they want to go the indie route, we can turn around a manuscript in 6 weeks. And that includes the copy editing. If they just give me a completed manuscript, I have copy editors I send it to. We take it to the typesetter. We do the book cover design, and your book is just a quick turnaround. In fact, I have one client. He's running for governor of Michigan, and he called me a couple months ago and said, "I want to use this book to help my election." And so we're trying to rush everything through, but we can do it in half to third the amount of time that a traditional publisher would be able to do. You get higher royalties, oftentimes twice as much as with traditional publishing. You can get, it's common to see $7 a book that you make. Or if you publish the book and you publish a bunch of print books and then go to places and sell them, I mean, you may be selling a book for $16.99 and your cost to print the book is $3. So there's a way that you could recoup your money a lot quicker. Also, the publishing landscape has leveled. So Amazon has changed the publishing landscape huge. CreateSpace and Kindle Direct have totally changed the whole business model, which is one of the reasons why traditional publishing companies are struggling right now. So people buy books, like 60% of all books are purchased online. And they're purchasing a book, the book cover is the size of a thumbnail. And your book they will see your book right alongside a Zondervan or a HarperCollins title. And so all of a sudden, the playing field has been leveled. And so people, it's not like it says this is endorsed by Zondervan. No, you could actually sell your books on Amazon. And if you market it the right way, you can sell a lot of books. And there are people who do sell a lot of books that can make a living just self-publishing their own books. But the best part is that you retain the rights as long as you want. I mean, you can, and if you want to stop publishing, there's just so much control over your book that you can do whatever you want with it. And you can publish a book one way, and then if you don't like what happened that first time, well, you can just change it and go another way with a different company, and nobody's going to stop you. And that happens all the time. There are self-published books that are bestsellers every day. I think, and I might be mistaken, but I think The Shack started out as just that. And, millions of copies later. So, that's pretty exciting. Now, there's a downside to indie publishing. You have to do it yourself. Well, the process can be overwhelming, like I said at the beginning. And it's hard to know, how do I do a good book cover? I see people that publish books, and they take, the book cover is a photo from their iPhone, and it looks bad. And that has been the downside of indie publishing anyway, is the quality historically has been low. So, but people don't always know who to go through, how to get, professional services done for their book. That's the stigma. That's the other downside, is that there's that self-publishing stigma. Poor quality, poor writing. And the idea that people say, well, you couldn't get picked up by a traditional publisher, and that's why they went the self-publishing route. And that can be true. It's also expensive if you do it right. If your budget isn't big enough, that can be a problem. And because publishers don't work for free. They're not nonprofit organizations. There are also some shady self-publishing companies out there. Happens all the time. I got a call from a lady, this was about a year ago. I was working for another publishing company at the time. She says, I want you to publish my book, but right now I'm going through bankruptcy. She was 75 years old. She had charged $25,000 on her credit card to publish a book, and the publishing company didn't follow through. And I said, look, I don't even want to talk about publishing your book until everything gets worked out for your finances and you can pay cash. Because there are some publishing companies that just want your money. And sorry to say, Tate Publishing went into bankruptcy, and a lot of people lost a lot of money, and it was a Christian self-publishing company. So it's really sad. That just happened about a year ago. And there's limited distribution into bookstores. Most bookstores don't want to take self-published or indie-published books. And the reason why is, in traditional publishing, the publisher sends books to a bookstore through the distribution company, and if the company can't sell the book, they can return it, and they don't have to pay for it, and then the distribution company will destroy the books. But like CreateSpace, who is the self-publishing imprint of Amazon, they have a no-return policy. So if a bookstore takes a book on, they can't return it. They're responsible for it. And because of that, bookstores refuse to carry CreateSpace books. So there is one other alternative, and I say this not because this is what we do, but it's hybrid publishing, and that's where you get the best of both worlds. And what you do is you utilize experts in traditional publishing. They work on your book to release a book that reads like a HarperCollins or a Zondervan or a Thomas Nelson book. I thought I came up with the term hybrid publishing when Tom Freiling and I started our company, but I found other people were using the same phrase. And now the Independent Publishers Association came out with 9 criteria to define what a hybrid publishing company is. And I just printed, I probably have about 8 copies left at my booth. If you want to take a look at that and see what the criteria is, it separates self-publishing companies from hybrid publishing companies. You're going to pay a little more for hybrid publishing, and the quality is going to be higher. I changed my company so that we can fit that all those criteria. One of the things that we're able to do is we're able to get books into bookstores, and I have an agreement with a book distribution company, so we can basically do what traditional publishing companies do.
What's the difference in terms of rights?
You get to keep your rights. Now for my company, and this is common for a lot of hybrid publishing companies, they may carry your rights for 3 years, and the reason why is the book distribution company doesn't want to have competition for the book, but after 3 years, then you can opt out every year, so that if you want to take the rights and go somewhere else, you can. I work for one company on the East Coast, and people brought in their books. I brought in books, and they were publishing their books. And then the company started going belly up, and I jumped off the ship just before it sunk. And but they were non-exclusive contracts, and so what they were able to do then, when the ship was sinking, is a lot of them came over to us because they were friends of mine, and we reissued their books so that they could keep on selling their books. So anyway, it's a big overview. I think it's helpful to kind of get an idea of how this works, especially if you're new to this. I'm available at my booth in the back. If you have any questions, like I said, come by and say hi. I have some books so you can see what we've done. But we're not after making money off people. We want to help people do what the best is for them. Oh, one other thing. Which option is best for you? If you have a big platform and you may be better off going your own route rather than through the traditional route. I met with a multi-million best-selling Christian author last fall. A friend of mine, I used to be a pastor at his church. And he was complaining about how little marketing he was getting from his traditional publishing company. And I told him, I said, well, why don't you publish your own books? And he says, well, I just want to write all the time. And he is one of the very few people that can actually just write. But I told him, I said, if you sold 1/3 of the number of books, you would equal everything, that your sales in a traditional publishing company, because your profit per book is so much higher. But he just wants to write and continue complaining about the landscape. If you don't have a big budget, I recommend that you go with a self-publishing company. Create Space is very inexpensive. It doesn't even cost you anything just to upload your files. And you can do some cover creation. Now, my recommendation is don't get a friend who's an artist to do your book cover, because there's a lot of secrets to developing a good book cover. But we can help you with this stuff. I do have a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, if you want to sign up, and we just give you tips, content on how to publish your book or write your book. And I also have free consultations. I sign up for that if you want to do that. But thank you very much. Hope I didn't overwhelm you too much, but appreciate being here and you being here. God bless.
All right, thanks, Mike. That was awesome information. Part of this day was to help resource you with just information like what Mike is giving. We're also going to have a talk this afternoon from Stephanie Sherwin, who is a bookstore here in Denver. She'll tell a little bit about her ministry and her bookstore and how to do your cover, like what to do and what not to do. So there's certain key things that she's going to share. We also have some authors here who co-authored a book, and that's going to be our breakout for this afternoon. And then of course our keynote speaker will be speaking twice today. I think we've got everybody here almost, right? Is everybody in the room? No. The last group, I think, just finally got here, so I'm so glad. So the second key I wanted to talk to you about is the power of identity. So you as authors, as people, if you can know who you are, know who you belong to, and the purpose for your life, know what's inside you, and consider the life you've led, the life you want to lead, the dreams you have. Consider the stories you've already had to tell, the ups and the downs. These are all part of the fabric of your life, of who you are. And I just feel like the power of knowing who you are and writing from that place in your heart and being vulnerable is such a powerful thing. A lot of us are really afraid to share our writing and with anybody. We're afraid. It's our baby. Especially if we've been vulnerable in it, right? Who's written things that they're just going, oh, my family, when they read this, me. I actually had to get permission from some people to write some of the things I've written, but that's the thing that's going to stir somebody's heart. I know, the Shack is testimony of that around the world, and we're going to hear more about that this afternoon. Before I introduce Paul, I would like to talk about these tables here. We've got all Paul's books available on that table with Stephanie over there, and you can buy those throughout the day. And we're going to have a book signing starting at about 3:30, I think, or 4, when Paul's finished with his Q&A. And so he's going to stay as long as it takes to sign your books. And he does spend a little time. I've seen him in his book lines. So.
That's how come you and I met.
Yeah, that's how we met. Yeah, it's wonderful. So, okay, resource-wise, I work with some publishers, and I just brought some more materials. They're not here today, but they're represented today by some of the materials on the table. One publisher is in South Dakota, has a real kingdom idea writing books that are shorter books, but to the point, to give people a platform. It's really excellent for people that have businesses and ministries who have legacy. You know? So he's actually written, the publisher has actually written this book on legacy, and we've talked a little bit about legacy this morning. These are important books for future generations. So telling your story, telling your wisdom, sharing your wisdom. So they help people with that. They actually have counseling sessions, and they're expanding their business. They also do awaken workshops for those of you that don't know how to write a book, feel like you don't have the time to write a book. They have actual writers that will help you write if you need that, ghostwriters. They'll actually work with you in a full day and help you outline your book. It's a wonderful and amazing program. My husband and I have gone through it just to see how they did it, and it was wonderful. This typewriter here was my mother's. I have fond memories of her typing letters, tapping letters to her sister as I was growing up. I did all my high school papers on that, and I just thought it was a neat prop next to my new Mac. So feel free to test it out. I still love typewriters. I love the way they smell. I love the smell of ink. I worked in the publishing field in newspapers for a long time, and I miss that. And darkroom smells, all that stuff. So smell it. We also have resource. Stephanie actually put together a resource of writers groups that are in Denver area. If you would like to connect with any of those, there's a couple really wonderful groups out there. And it's so good to have a partner in writing. I was part of a writers group. I led one for many, many years, and we haven't even done anything. It was in this county we haven't really done anything in about 8 years. They still have it in the newspaper at Sky High News. I don't know why they won't take it out. I've asked them to several times, but it's kind of fun. We were called the Rough Riders, and we actually put out a little arts magazine and distributed it to the libraries, into the coffee shops, and we made money for scholarships for kids going into the creative arts. So there's so many things that you can do.
Yeah, we have, I have information on writers groups as well in Denver through Writers on the Rock, and they have about 7 or 8 groups around the Denver area.
Several and beyond in Colorado. I think they're down to Colorado Springs, and Northern Colorado has a group too. So connect with other writers. It's really fun to hang with writers and to hear each other. It's not, some groups can be a little scary if you get into a critique group and really dig deep. My groups were always like kind critiques. We loved reading to each other, and we always encouraged each other. So you find one that fits you. So I also have my cards here, my writing coach cards. I've got a website that explains more of what I do. And what else do we have here? That's it, I think. So if I think of anything more, I'll let you know later. So, okay, let's get on with our main speaker today. Paul, come on up. Excited to introduce this man. This is a dream of mine. He's actually been a hero of mine because he is a writer, but also because of the testimony of his book and what God did with him around the world. It is crazy, and it gives us all hope as writers and creative people that we too can experience something like that. So I just give it to Paul right now.
Sweet, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And Mike, that was really, really helpful. Really helpful. I'm so glad when somebody does that kind of thing because I have no clue. Yes, thank you. Yes, somebody knows me. And I want to approach it in a lot of different ways. First, there's this question that's been kind of nagging me, and when I have a question nagging me, I know that it's important to somebody. And when you look back at your life, because there's not a lot of younger people here at the moment. There's a few. And yeah. So you have a broader expanse of looking back at your history. How many of you were really good liars? Yeah. You can write fiction. Serious. I tell people all the time that, I'm a really good storyteller. But when I was growing up in the church, it was called lying. And that's part of redemption. Because lying is so destructive. I mean, it's so destructive. And the fact that those very skills can become part of how you're able to weave a story is quite remarkable, and I think part of redemption. I want to tell you a few different stories, and then I want to tell you some of my own experience, just to frame this, because it'll wind a little bit into what Mike was talking about too. And I think it's still true that I think the statistic is 56% of all writers, and that includes journalists, copywriters in film, in television, people who work, in writing as a profession, or want to. 56% can make a living wage. I think that's what the statistic was. And so you need to understand something about this whole thing. Plus, because of the technology, the influx of new writers is huge. And so there's a proliferation out there. Now, the good news is there is a God who is bigger than all of that.
Yes.
Right? And I want to frame a couple different stories just to give you a sense of the bigger picture, because that's kind of that's where I play a lot, because it makes sense out of all the minutia of what we're working through. So on my wrist, I wear, hold on a second. I wear this little bracelet here, this little band, and it's part of it's sort of an icon. That is, it has a meaning to me. And it has a meaning to anyone else that you ever see who will wear this, who you'll see with this. You can buy them at the hardware store, and you take the centerpiece out, and then you use heat to attach them together. But it's white with a red thread that runs through it. And it was given to me by Bob Goff, if you know who Bob is. Bob is the oldest child I've ever met, and one of the smartest as well. But he wrote Love Does. He wrote Love Does, and he's got a couple other books out, including one that just came out last week, Everyone, Everywhere. And he's a force in the world. But he puts these gatherings together, and he and a friend of mine who wrote Blue Like Jazz, if you know who that is. And his name is Donald Miller. So Donald and Bob are good friends, and I met Bob through Donald. Donald lived in Portland, where I lived, and in fact, it's one of our great jokes that when the shack was just a manuscript printed at Office Depot, I dropped one off at his house, and he wasn't home, and he still has never found it. So it's great. It's great. But Donald and Bob, they would have these gatherings, and first it started with like 15 people, and we go up to, Bob has a lodge next to the Malibu Young Life Camp up in British Columbia, and it's a fantastically beautiful place. And for about 4 days, we would do crazy team building kinds of things, jump off cliffs, go through glacial waterfalls. I mean, just like, stuff you do every day. And you built relationships, and you had these incredible conversations. Well, he and Don decided to bring about 270 of these folks together to spend some time together. Okay? And the criteria were three things. They had to be people that had platform. Now, it wasn't aimed to make us feel good about ourselves. That was not the point. I hope that's not mine. Okay, good. I feel much better. So it wasn't to make, it wasn't about notoriety and platform, but it was a way to bring people who have found themselves in this situation. A lot of them get there by accident. They have no clue, and it isolates them tremendously. Because all of a sudden you're in a place where a lot of people are now looking to you to fill the hole in their own heart.
Yeah.
Right? And so it creates isolation. And so he wanted to bring a whole bunch of these folks together just so that they can talk to each other and have story together, And the second criteria was they needed to be humble. That is, these were people who were comfortable inside their own skin. That's my definition of humility. Someone who is comfortable inside their own skin. Jesus is the humility of God. It is God comfortable inside his own skin. Okay? And so the third criteria was they had to be fun. Now, Bob laughs. He goes, "That knocked so many people out. You wouldn't believe it." They're humble. They have a platform, but they're just no fun. Right? And they haven't learned how to be a child yet. So, so about 260, and you were allowed to bring your family. So at the time, we had 20 in our family. We have 6 kids, Kim and I, that's 8, and then we had grandkids and some spouses along the way. Now we have 12 grandbabies who are 10 years old and under, and 2 of our kids aren't married yet. So
Wow, great.
doing just fine, thank you very much. And we haven't got past Genesis 1 where we're told to multiply. But, Kim's side of the family is huge, just huge. It's great. She's a North Dakota gal that her and her family migrated west. So, you know, I'm married to someone where there's no 50 Shades of nothing. And, yeah, don't you know? And, so I invite my kids, some of my kids, I invited all the kids, but only some of them could make it. And one of the families of our oldest son, Chad, his wife, Michelle, and their 3 of our grandbabies came. Now, Chad is our firstborn. Chad is a for real genius. He is the one who scored a perfect SAT, a perfect GRE. He and his wife both graduated in honors programs from Caltech. He in honors physics and she in geochemistry. Wow. So our goal as grandparents to keep the kids from becoming nerds, you know. So, although there's turning out to be some value in that. And but they, Chad's brilliant. He's got a 5-year PhD in statistics.
Wow.
Right? And so, yeah, it's a different level. You'd never know it being around him.
Yeah.
He is one of the kindest, gentlest. He's an incredible musician because he's a mathematician. You know, and there's a fold over. So about the second day, early in the second day into this time, and it was nobody was brought up and said, "Look what this person did." That wasn't about it at all. In fact, you didn't have a clue who most of these people were, and you just end up in conversations, and it was by accident if you found out that, oh yeah, they're on that television series, or you've seen them, or, you know, so there were artists, musicians, movie stars, business people. It was very eclectic. And photographers, just incredible theater people, artistic people, painters, sculptors, and athletes, you know, just people who ended up in notoriety and stuff. So second day in, Chad says, you know, I don't belong here. He said, yeah, I understand that I'm sort of attached to notoriety because I'm dad's son. And humility, which is a benchmark for Chad. And he is humble enough to know that he is, right? Mm-hmm. And he's comfortable inside his own skin in that sense. And then, but he's an introvert, and he's quiet, he sits in the background, and he has to work at relationships, which he does, and he knows that it's so significant. And that he is fundamentally created a relational being. He's just wired in such a way that he has to work at it to get past the barriers of it. And it was one of those things when your child says, I just don't feel like I belong here. It's like, you know. And he says, so Michelle loves this. So I'm going to take care of the kids so that you all can participate. Great. So that night, Kim and I were talking about this, and we go to Chad and Michelle, and we go like, hey, you know what? We're going to take the kids so that you two can just go be with some of the young people, you know? Because there was a group of kids, 20s to 30-year-olds, that were going down to play in the phosphorescence, you know, the light that illumines when you move your hand around in it. It's incredibly beautiful and wonderful. And so about a group of 15 of them were going down there. So Chad and Michelle went down there. During that time, one of the guys, who's this amazing photographer, he will build a relationship. He does portraiture. So he'll build a relationship with you while you're there. And he'll ask you questions about your life, your history, all the while he's shooting you. And he catches people so that you can see the portrait and you know their story. Or you know parts of their story, right? Because he gets them past the presentation and into the grounding of what's going on. So this young man is down there, and at one point he says to the group, he says, you know, there's something that's really been bothering me. He says, people are starting to talk about creatives as a category, right? That there are creatives. You know, he says, I don't think that's true. I think that everyone who has been made in the image and likeness of God is a creative, right? So whether you are in business or whether you are, you know, the very fact that we can bring into being a baby who will never cease to exist should tell us that we're a creative, right? And it's an unbelievable expanding universe, you know, that's way more profound than a book or a movie, you know. And so, but he says, I think everybody's a creative, and I think by creating the categories, all of a sudden people feel like they don't belong.
Yep.
Well, that impacted Chad,
Yep.
right? So because he's a high-level mathematician, and he's working on algorithms to solve deep information processing for cancer research, right? So, but to be released in terms of knowing, hey, I'm a creative. I am a creative. The next morning, this is that evening, the next morning we go to breakfast, and there are these round tables, 8 to 10 people at a table, and we moved around so that we could meet different people and all this. There were 60 young people who had paid their own way to take care of us for those 4 days, right? So they're serving us the meals and all this kind of stuff. And so you just choose a place to sit. Nobody had assigned seating. You didn't sit in the same place twice. And at the end of the breakfast, somebody got up and they said, hey, look, we have been pranked. We have been pranked. And later Bob says, I'm in charge of this and I have no idea who did this, right? But they said, under each of your plates, 260, there are 260 different messages from God to the person, and you have a message from God for you sitting under your plate.
Wow.
Right? Written by all kinds of different handwriting, right? And so turn over your plate because that's a message from God to you. And Chad turns over his plate, he opens up his little piece of paper, and here's what it says. You belong here. That was 3 years ago, and Chad has never taken this off. Because this is what you get at the end of that time. And it changed his life to be told, you belong here. So let me make that declaration over you. You are a creative, and you belong here. Second story. So when the shack started to take off, and we were living in 900 square foot little space, and it was all a mystery to me. The whole thing was just a crazy thing. And let me back up a little bit. Maybe I'll give you some of my story this way, leading into this one. And you know, I've always been a writer. And writing, I grew up in the highlands of New Guinea. I grew up in a tribal culture that had never seen a white person. We had no technology whatsoever. And you know, it was nicknamed, the area I grew up was nicknamed Cannibal Valley. And it wasn't a joke. So, like I say, it changes your view of finger food, that's right. So, sorry. Totally improper. And, but it was 40 to 60,000 members of this particular tribe over 100 square miles. And we were the first in, and I was a year old. So I grew up inside an entirely different kind of world. And as I grew, writing became the only way I had to get my inside world out. And I learned to write by reading. And I read the classics. And I read everything I could get my hands on. And that's really how, I never took a writing class my entire life, right? And so but writing was a way for me to try to communicate. And over the years, I learned to write poetry and songs and short stories and whatever. And I gave them as gifts. You know, the first half of my life, my writing was so dark because of the tragedies that I had to try to deal with, the great sadnesses in my life. And plus I was terrified of my dad. And I couldn't take the risk that he would see him. So I would write and destroy, you know. And, but over the years and separation from that history and the slow incremental process of healing in my life, I began to write gifts for friends and family. And they loved them, you know. And I chalked that up, you know, to being friends and family. Of course they will love them. What are they going to do, you know? And so I always thought, yeah, I can write enough for the things that I do. I even did some business writing and wrote private placement memorandums for high-level venture capital companies. And so, you know, I played in the writing field for a long time. I was involved in theater, we wrote plays, you know, so I had a lot of experience in writing stuff, but it never crossed my mind to ever publish anything. That just wasn't my world. And over the course of a long process of healing, near the end of that particular tearing down and building up, because I had a lot of work to do. And that, I can identify an 11-year journey of basically taking the inside world, the broken heart, the shack on the inside, and dismantling it down to the studs and the foundation and rebuilding it. About 11 years. Well, the last 4 years of those 11 years, when I'm still trying to work through my stuff, Kim starts saying, you know, someday, as a gift for our kids, would you please write something that puts in one place how you think, because you think outside the box.
Ooh, come on.
And I never felt ready until those 11 years were done. And when 2005 flipped over, I finally, and that was the year I was turning 50, right? And 50 is kind of a cool year, because it's the year of Jubilee.
That's right.
You know, and there was a real sense that the timing of this had come together. And I didn't know that my deconstruction, reconstruction process, or the redemption process, or the restoration process would be fundamentally 11 years long. In fact, when it started, I thought, this is going to take at least 2 or 3 lifetimes. You know, and there's no formula to this. Some people work through their stuff way faster. And but 11 years for me. And at the end of those 11 years, I'm looking back at my life and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like one of the healthiest people that I know. Right? I have no secrets. I have no addictions. And I'm not talking porn and all those yucky kinds of stuff. I'm also talking doing something great for God. Let me tell you, that's a gold-chained addiction. You know, that will drive your shame through your performance issues and put you in the hole. You know, how about pleasing my dad? You know, and finally, I'm like free from all these addictions, and I'm going like, and I'm the same person in every situation. I come from a sexual abuse history where I was never the same person in any 2 situations. It was too dangerous. And so now, like, I'm the same person. And finally, I felt ready enough to do what Kim's been asking me to do. So in 2005, on the train to one of my 3 jobs, I had a 40-minute train ride. I wrote most of a little story, got it done. At Christmas, went to Office Depot, made 15 copies on their photocopier, put a little plastic cover on it with a little spiral side thing called The Shack. And 6 went to the kids, Kim got a copy, and I gave the rest to my friends, and I went back to work. Those 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that book to do.
Amen.
Not one time during that process did it cross my mind, you should publish this. Not once. It just was not on my radar. It wasn't part of a bucket list. It wasn't like, you know, some vision or dream or any of that kind of stuff. I did it because I had nothing else to give my kids that year. And 2, the timing was right. And I was, you know, so when people say, why did you write The Shack? I say, I was trying to do like the Bible says and submit to my wife.